Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Tuesday. This is Seattle Now. We're entering the election home stretch. Exactly 1 week to go before November 4th. Seattle voters could choose a brand new mayor and elect a slate of more progressive candidates to several key positions, including city council and city attorney. We're breaking it down with KUOW politics editor Kat Smith in a minute. But first, let's get you caught up. Today, the Seattle City Council will vote on Mayor Bruce Harrell's proposal to prohibit restrictive covenants on new grocery stores and pharmacies. It's a common industry practice among grocers and pharmacies to block similar retailers from opening in their space once they move out. In recent months, several grocery stores and pharmacies have permanently closed in the Seattle area. Today's City Council meeting starts at 2. Port of Seattle commissioners are meeting today to discuss amendments to its welcoming port policy, which reflects the port's commitment to inclusion of immigrants, refugees, and international visitors. Today's update is in response to current federal immigration policies. The new version will focus on equal access to the port regardless of immigration status. The meeting starts at 10:30. And the King County Council will vote on a proposal today to rename the Health Through Housing program after the late Frank Chop. Chop served as Speaker of the Washington House for 17 years and was a housing advocate behind programs like the Low Income Housing Institute and the Seattle Tenants Union. The meeting starts at 1:30. Check back for more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. 1 week from today, ballots are due for a consequential election here in Seattle. Voters will decide whether to keep Mayor Bruce Harrell for another 4 years or elect Katie Wilson, a more progressive challenger. The political direction of the city council is also at stake, and voters will choose a new county executive for the first time in 16 years. KUOW politics editor Kat Smith is keeping tabs on all of it. She's here to break down some of the key races as we hit the home stretch. Kat, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me again, Trish.
All right, well, let's start with the race for mayor. Bruce Harrell's asking voters for 4 more years. Challenger Katie Wilson had a really strong, unexpectedly strong showing in the primary.
Yeah, she did.
First, let's hear a little bit of audio from the recent KUOW debate hosted by Libby Dankman. Here's a little bit of what both candidates had to say during closing statements.
I'm running for mayor because I love the city. I've lived here for over 20 years. My husband and I are now raising our daughter here, and I want Seattle to be a place where she can grow up and build a life if she wants to. But right now, that vision feels very, very far out of reach. Everything is so expensive.
The fact of the matter is we are living in unprecedented times in many respects, and experience will indeed matter. Life experiences as well. That many of you know, my mother was in a concentration camp because of an executive order. We have a tyrant as our president right now, and it could divide us or keep us as one.
Kat, what are those two campaigns trying to emphasize during the home stretch here?
Yeah, and we are in the home stretch. And, just for a little bit of context, in the primary, Wilson was up almost 10 points over the incumbent Bruce Harrell, which is quite a lot for an incumbent to be down. And recent polling from the last few days shows that Katie Wilson and Bruce Harrell are kind of neck and neck. She might have a little bit of an edge, but it's pretty close to the margin of error. So this race seems like it could go either way. And Harrell is kind of going on the attack. He's vulnerable, even though he's the incumbent. So he's attacking Katie Wilson on her experience, like you heard in that clip. He says she doesn't have the chops to lead City Hall and that she's never managed a big org. She has no experience with paid employees. He's not totally wrong on that. The nonprofit that she started, the Transit Riders Union, it's a small advocacy group. It doesn't have a ton of paid employees. It's got volunteers. Its budget's like $200,000, whereas the city budget is like $9 billion. It's got 41 departments, vastly different scale than what she's used to working at. Wilson's campaign, meanwhile, is hitting Harrell on homelessness and affordability, like you heard in that clip. She says the city has not gotten better under Harrell's last 4 years and that Seattle's too expensive to live in, too expensive to raise a family. She's got a toddler at home. And then also, the mayor hasn't done enough to meaningfully house homeless people. Homelessness has risen under his tenure. The number of shelter beds has decreased. Plus, building new supportive housing and shelter capacity is so expensive and just takes forever. So she's hitting him on that.
Kat, we just heard a little bit of a debate there between Bruce Harrell and Katie Wilson. You have been following many of them, more than a dozen at this point. What have they been like? What's the tone?
I think I would say that these two candidates are pretty sick of each other. I think they've actually, at this point, I think they've done more than 20 debates in the last few months. And that is a lot of time to spend on stage with somebody. And they do go after each other. And it just seems like they're sick of hearing each other talk and they're ready to be done with this. But also, the more of these debates that they do, the better it is kind of for Katie Wilson, because she's getting stronger at these public speaking events as they go on and on and on and on. She's really green. She hasn't had a lot of practice talking to the media and hosting big events, but she's getting in her reps here. Bruce Harrell is great at this stuff. When he gets on stage, he talks to the crowd. He's got charisma. And Katie Wilson tends to talk at the moderator. She doesn't have the same kind of charisma. You can tell that she's not as comfortable in these settings as Bruce Harrell is. She does better when she's one-on-one talking policy minutia with people individually, but she's getting a ton of experience at these debates and she's getting stronger with each one.
Interesting. Okay, well, as you mentioned, Bruce Harrell is really trying to make the case that Katie Wilson isn't experienced enough to run the city. It's been his main theme. How has she responded?
I mean, like I said, this is a tough one for her because it is true. Like, she doesn't have the executive experience that, like, Bruce Harrell has had running the city for 4 years. Katie Wilson's trying to get around that by saying, look, I worked on big progressive policy agendas. She lobbied on behalf of the Jumpstart payroll tax on big businesses. And that is a tax that the city has used to help plug its budget hole. She also campaigned for higher wages in the region, stuff like that. And she said to do that, she's had to build coalitions. She's had to seek out partners to work on those issues. She's had to manage personalities, differences of opinion. She's had to come up to speed quickly on these things. She doesn't have a background in tax policy. She knows there's going to be a very steep learning curve if she were to win the mayor's race. But she plans to surround herself with a team that will help her get up to speed. No idea who those people are going to be or how effective they'll be, how much experience they'll have, but that's what she says she wants to do.
All right. Well, KUOW's very own Katie Campbell wrote a profile on Katie Wilson that has been getting a lot of attention. We reported that Wilson gets by in Seattle with some money from her parents. How is this story playing out in the campaign into her image?
Yeah, so I mean, basically the story here is that Katie Wilson comes from privilege. That's a word that she uses herself. Her parents are college professors in New York, and they send her money to help her and her small family make ends meet. She uses that money to cover her toddler's childcare, which is about $2,000 a month. It's around what she pays in rent, too, by the way. As you can imagine, the Harrell campaign has really picked up on this and run with it. His campaign blasted out a press release last week, a few days after the story published, saying people have no idea who Katie Wilson is. She paints herself as this populist, progressive, working class hero, but she's never had to struggle. This is the campaign claiming this. See, she's living off her parents' dime. What a fraud. Bruce Harrell actually does come from working class roots. He's a son of Seattle. You know, why should we let this cosplaying rich kid from New York come in and tell us how to run our city and our lives? And over the weekend, his campaign started sending out text messages trying to fundraise off of that narrative.
Saw that.
Quote, Katie Wilson's parents pay her bills. Here's a link to donate to Harrell's campaign. That's not the story that we published, to be frank, at all. Harrell's campaign is spinning our story. Wilson does live a modest life in Seattle. She shops at thrift stores. She rents a tiny apartment on Cap Hill. She's not flashy. She's worked a string of low-level blue-collar jobs. To me, it looks like the Harrell campaign sat back for a couple days, watched how the conversation about the story developed on social media, in right-wing media. Right-wing media did pounce on this story immediately. As you can imagine, people like Brandy Cruz and Ari Hoffman on their shows are now calling Katie Wilson a Nepo baby, a trust fund baby, that she's living high on the hog on her parents' dime. And again, that's not true, but the Harrell campaign latched onto what I see as this right-wing media narrative, trying to spin it to their advantage. Obviously, that's politics. Another way to read the story, which the Harrell campaign is kind of sidestepping, is that Katie Wilson knows all too well how expensive Seattle is. She can barely afford to make ends meet in this city, and her parents give her some help. They've been giving her help during the campaign. A lot of people in this city have gotten help from family. Seattle is a very expensive place to live. So you could see a more generous way to interpret the story that's friendlier and more relatable. That's obviously not the route the Harrell campaign is going.
All right. Well, my mailbox has also been packed with campaign mailers, including many mailers about the race for King County Executive. King County Council members Claudia Balducci and Gurmai Zahalai are vying for that job, which isn't widely known but super important.
Yeah.
First, remind us of the scope for for this job.
Yeah, and we like to joke around the office that like this is the most important job, that like nobody really knows what it is. It is huge. Like the number of county employees is bigger than the city of Seattle. I think it's like if Seattle has 14,000 employees, the county is like 18,000. There's more people that work for the county. If you flush your toilet, you're interacting with the King County wastewater system. So it's wastewater, buses, metro buses, the jail system. They do public health, large network of parks and recreation facilities. This is a very big job. We did a story recently. There's a national association of county execs, and they say that this is a thing that happens actually all over the country. Is people tend to forget that the county exec job tends to be bigger than a mayor job. This is not a thing that's unique to King County. It happens all over the place, and people who are county execs just kind of chuckle about it. Like it's just a known not perk of the job, but you can kind of fly under the radar when you may be managing a much larger budget and staff than a lot of the cities that are within that county.
All right. Interesting. Claudia Balducci, Gurmai Zahalai running against each other. How are they differentiating themselves from each other?
Not well, actually. It's kind of interesting. Or like Claudia Balducci has a lot more experience. She's been on the council longer. They're both sit on the county council together. They're both left-leaning progressives. They get along with each other fairly well. Claudia Balducci's been in the role longer, and she was the mayor of Bellevue before that. Gurmai Zahalai is a relative newcomer to politics compared to her. They're both fairly progressive. I think you could maybe argue that Zahalai is maybe a touch more progressive, but they're not doing a great job like differentiating themselves from each other. Gurmai Zahalai did very well in the primary, so it looks like he's got the edge leading into the general election. But on paper, there's just not a lot of daylight between these two.
All right. Seattle City Council race we're following most closely is in District 9, which is a citywide position. Council President Sarah Nelson is trying to hang on to her seat against challenger Dion Foster. Who's got the edge there? How are these candidates trying to make their case to voters?
Yeah, well, Dion Foster really has the edge. We can talk about how she did on primary night, but I mean, I'll just say for now, Sarah Nelson has a lot of work to do to make up ground in this race. And just for context, if people don't follow the city council that closely, Sarah Nelson was elected in 2021, the same year that Bruce Harrell was elected mayor. And she campaigned on a clean up Seattle platform. There was rampant street disorder at the time the pandemic was going on. Public drug use was everywhere, visible homelessness. Our police department had lost hundreds of cops. And she was offering this pathway to turn the city around. Now, what she's done is she's sort of hung her hat on some of the most controversial policies of the last couple of years. Recently, that's planned to expand CCTV cameras in the city to monitor gun violence and street disorder, and laws that created these kind of geographic no-go zones in the city where people who have drug or prostitution charges are not supposed to go into to try and curb some of that activity in those hotspots. Council President Nelson was a big booster of those policies, and she's been standing by them on the campaign trail, and she's been taking heat for how controversial those measures are. People who don't like them really don't like them. Her opponent, Dion Foster, says that these drug and prostitution laws have not worked. They don't address root causes. And, Foster's interesting. Dion Foster is a former policy advisor for the city, and she helms a nonprofit that helped advocate for the statewide capital gains tax. And that's basically, a tax the rich law. It taxes large profits on the sale of stocks and bonds, and it only affects the state's wealthiest people. And it's a very small number of people. And Foster wants to do this at the city level, too. In the last year or so, I think the city council had a chance to discuss a local capital gains tax, and ultimately they ended up rejecting the idea. And Sarah Nelson, in particular, was against this idea. She says it's not a reliable source of revenue. And the state has seen that revenues from capital gains sales can differ a lot from year to year. And the reasons for that vary. But so ultimately, Nelson decided this isn't the best way for us to try and build a budget around because it can fluctuate so much.
All right. Well, a lot of feelings showed up on primary night. Sarah Nelson trailed Dion Foster by more than 20 percentage points.
Yeah.
That is a lot of ground to make up. What is it going to take?
That's a huge gap. I don't know if she can make that up. We were talking about Bruce Harrell. He's got a 9-10 point gap.
Yeah, this one's bigger.
He might be able to make that up. All right, maybe he can do that. I don't know how you make up 20 points. And the fact that Nelson is really hanging her hat on some of those most controversial issues when she's down that much, I don't know. It doesn't look great for her. It'll be, if she pulls this off and manages to win this election, that's like a comeback for the ages.
Yeah, maybe we can talk about what happens to the city after that if anything changes, Kat. Another race voters are being asked to decide is Seattle City Attorney, the city's top legal official. Incumbent Ann Davison is facing challenger Erica Evans, who led the primary by more than 20 points. How is this race playing out?
Very similar to the District 9 race that we just talked about. 20-point gap between the two candidates, more of a centrist, kind of middle of the road incumbent, lefty, populist challenger who seems to have the edge right now. Same thing with Ann Davison, the city attorney. She was elected at the same time that Sarah Nelson and Bruce Harrell were. Business-friendly, centrist person. In 2020, she publicly left the Democratic Party, tried to run for lieutenant governor as a Republican, and then was elected city attorney, which is a nonpartisan role, by the way. But she decided to go public with her decision to leave the Democratic Party. And in the primary, her opponents were trying to use that against her, saying, this woman is a Republican in an age of Trump. Trump is very unpopular in Seattle. Do voters really want to have somebody who is a Republican in this elected office? And she's chosen not to address that on the campaign trail. We have asked her several times, are you still a Republican? And she does not want to answer it. She says it's not relevant in this race. What's relevant are local issues. She has sued the Trump administration several times on behalf of the city. She's not a Trump supporter herself, and she doesn't think that party affiliation matters in this race. But I got to tell you, she's down as much as she is. And interestingly, her progressive challenger, Erica Evans, she worked in the city attorney's office before Davison, and then she moved on to be a U.S. attorney, and she helped prosecute some of the January 6th rioters. And then she ended up leaving that role when Trump came back into office. So she has a history with the Trump administration and being critical of the Trump administration. And so she's been trying to paint herself as somebody who will stand up to Trump and trying to cast doubt in voters' minds whether the city attorney would do that.
Progressive challengers, Kat, did really well in the primary elections. What does it tell you about how the election might play out?
We could see something really, really interesting happen on election night. I mean, we did discuss a scenario where Bruce Harrell could turn this thing around and he could win. But if he doesn't, what we could be looking at is like the three top elected officials in Seattle, these three like centrist, business-friendly moderates, all going down and losing at the same time. They came in together, they may go out together, and they ran on like a Clean Up Seattle platform. And after 4 years, voters are saying, you didn't do exactly what we wanted you to do, or you didn't do it the way we wanted you to do, and we want to do something different. We want to go in a more progressive direction. All three of them are facing challengers that are further to the left than them, and I think it's really interesting that they're all three of them are in the fight for their political life, and it really seems like the voters of Seattle are standing up and they may say, we want someone more progressive. This isn't what we signed up for after all. We tried it, and we don't like it.
What are you watching for in these last few days before we drop the ballots?
I was just saying some doom and gloom for the incumbents, but it really is possible that Bruce Harrell could turn this around. I think the last time he ran for mayor, he ran against Lorena Gonzalez, and he underperformed in that primary too. I think he was only up a couple of points over her on primary night, and then he ended up beating her pretty soundly in the general election. So it might be over in District 9, it might be over in the the city attorney's office, but the mayor's race, I think, is far from over. And I think that new polling shows how close these two candidates are, that Katie Wilson has the slimmest of edges over Bruce Harrell. I think we're probably going to see Bruce Harrell pulling out all the stops in the next few days here.
All right, Kat Smith, politics editor at KUOW, thanks so much for stopping by.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate you listening to Seattle Now. Today's episode was produced by Andy Hurst. It was edited by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez. Our production team also includes Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers, Vaughn Jones, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you soon.